to cover, and I tend to talk a lot, and you probably will have questions. So let's get rocking and rolling. All right, my name is Heather Parry, and I'm a private college counselor here in Seattle. I primarily work with students in Seattle public schools, but do work with students from other parts of the country as well. My background is on the college admissions side of things. So I started at Claremont McKenna College in California, small private liberal arts college. Also happens to be my alma mater. Also going back for my reunion tomorrow. It's gonna be fun. And also then contrasting that experience with working in the admissions office at University of Washington Seattle campus. So large public research university, so a nice different set of students and different set of admission criteria. So that's a little bit of what I'll be drawing on today, but I will primarily be focusing on my work right now as a college counselor and kind of shepherding students through the process. So first and foremost, I'll be talking about essentially the timeline to be targeting for junior year. Everyone's a junior, right? Or a parent of a junior? Yes, okay. So the timeline for spring of junior year through basically this time next year. And I've broken it down into 4 kind of different sections with a few different components at each point in time. I'll focus on the things that are the most relevant for the largest number of students. Know that if you're a student athlete or a musician or a visual artist, and those are things you're planning to continue in college, for example, you may have additional components or the timeline for your process may be slightly different, and I'm certainly happy to answer questions if that's the case at the end. But I'll talk about the timeline first. Next, I'll share some of my favorite college planning resources. I could fill like multiple pages with different websites and things that I find to be useful, but I've kind of highlighted a few of the core ones that I use most regularly. I'll talk a little tiny bit about essay advice. Has anyone gone to the essay session today? No? Okay.
The essay session?
The college essay session. Okay. I'll talk a tiny bit about it. It's really hard to cover in like 5 minutes, so maybe there's resources online for that after the fact, because I think there's a whole session about it. And then lastly, I will talk a little bit about what to look for if you're considering hiring a private college counselor, and just some things to look out for, especially in light of the recent admissions scandal with Aunt Becky. Want to make sure that if you're thinking about hiring someone that they are committed to ethics and professional standards. So I'll give you some ideas on what to look for and how to vet folks that you might be considering. So, starting with spring of junior year, where you are right now, you've already selected courses for next year. Hopefully, you are taking core classes still, even if you have met graduation requirements. So, English for sure to graduate, but also math, science, foreign language, and social science. Obviously, those are the big 5. For some students, you've completed all you want to do in foreign language, for example, but maybe you're more interested in the sciences. Senior year is an okay time if you want to double up in an area of interest to you, as long as that's a core area and not just doubling up on study halls, for example. So that part you've already done, so I won't talk about that too much. Hopefully everyone's got a good plan in place. College fair, there's a college fair this Saturday at Seattle University. There's a couple of hundred, or not a couple hundred, maybe 150 colleges that will be in attendance. It's at 10 a.m. on Saturday. So if you are just dipping your toe in the water and you want to start seeing what colleges are out there and you want to talk to a lot of them in one place, that might be a good starting point. I know everyone's taken the SAT fairly recently, or the juniors have, not the parents, hopefully. So you have at least one test under your belt. I think June of junior year is an excellent time to retest, or if you didn't take anything yet, it's a good time to try your hand at one of the tests. There's a SAT and an ACT offered at the beginning of June. Great timing because AP testing is done, finals haven't started, and you're still in school mode. Your brain is at, well, it's maybe a little bit fried, but it's not in summer mode. So it's a good time, I think, to do those tests. Also, I think now is a great time to be developing your college list. I know many families have done some college visits over the spring break time, or maybe doing them in the summer as well. But thinking about what you're looking for and maybe visiting even local options if you're not able to travel far, or if you are considering local schools, I think that's a great thing to consider doing. And I'll share some resources about investigating schools in a little bit. I think junior year is also a great time for students to deepen their involvement in activities that they like and seek out any leadership opportunities that are available, or increases in responsibilities in a part-time job, for example, or in other activities outside of school. So thinking about that, because a lot of schools will be asking for essays on leadership, or that's a core value of theirs in some way, and so they may have questions about that in their application or in the resume section, so it's good to have something to share with regards to that. Last but not least, who just did their taxes in the room? Hopefully all the parents. So this is a great time to sit down and look at what your annual expected family contribution is for college. Because for your junior that's going to be applying to colleges this fall and winter, the financial aid application opens in October, and it is based on the year that we just finished. So the year that you just did, 2018, you just did those taxes. So I would strongly recommend doing an expected family contribution calculator. I have that on the other page, where you can put in some of that tax return information, and you can get a ballpark figure for what the federal government thinks that your family can pay per year for college. So it's a good starting point, and it's a good conversation with your son or daughter. And I think it's a really essential component to determining what types of colleges are appropriate for your student, not just in terms of admission likelihood or fit, but the financial fit is really, really big as well. So I would strongly recommend doing that and having that conversation with your student. What do you expect them to contribute per year of college? What's the maximum budget your family's comfortable with? Does that align with what the federal government thinks you can pay? That might determine the distribution of your college list. So questions about the spring of junior year, some of those tasks I just went through really quickly. Okay, cool. Next, summer. Yes, I think students should be doing some stuff in the summer, unfortunately. Hopefully this is when you can finalize or continue to build your college list. I typically recommend lists of around 5 to 10 colleges. Some students have fewer, some students have more, but somewhere around there is a nice range, both in terms of admission likelihood and as well as the financial piece that I just mentioned. I think summer is also a good time to actually do something meaningful and not just play video games the whole time. Many colleges will ask how you spent your most recent summer, and especially as you're gearing up to sort of almost become a real adult person, it's good to be doing something, whether that's taking a class, whether that's having a part-time job, working as a camp counselor, volunteering, babysitting, whatever have you. Hopefully do something with your time other than just sitting around. Brainstorming and writing your essay. I know this sounds a little ambitious, but I think it's a good thing to try to tackle in the summer, because especially if you're a fall athlete, or if you have a lot of major involvement in school or a really rigorous course load, if you're doing IB, it's really good to try to tackle some of this in the summer. The prompts are available now if you wanted to look at them, but don't really need to pay attention to them, because one of the prompts is essentially a catch-all: submit an essay on a topic of your choice. So the prompts are not particularly relevant, but you can start doing some brainstorming around stories and ideas and situations you want to highlight, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. As I mentioned, applications do open in the summer, usually around August 1st for the common application, or the UW's application opens a little bit later. I believe they're going to be September 1st again this year. I'm not 100% sure. But you can start filling in those applications. There's even schools that you could apply to over the summer and find out over the summer before you get back to school in the fall. So don't rule that out. You can definitely get a good jump start over the summer. And then finally, I think it's a great idea to sit down once you have your list more or less finalized and just make a spreadsheet of the colleges themselves, the deadlines, what are the components that you need to put together, or printing it out from each individual school's website, just something so that you know what you're working towards in the fall. Because one major trend I'm seeing is that a lot of students and a lot of colleges are expecting applications to be done closer to November as opposed to what it used to be was around January. And that's because a lot of schools are having earlier deadlines for scholarship consideration, or if you want to do engineering, apply by November 1st. If you want to be considered for the business program or other programs that are very popular these days, they'll often have earlier deadlines. And then there's also the actual earlier formal deadlines like early action or early decision, which you may have heard of, and the quick and dirty details. Early action, you can do basically anywhere that offers it. You're applying by around November 1st, you're finding out mid-December, and you don't have to decide if you're going there or not until May. So it's great for a lot of students, especially if you feel like you're finishing junior year really strong. There's nothing new that's going to happen in senior year that you need the college to know in order to evaluate your application. I often see better scholarship consideration for those students, and often better admission results as well. So things are kind of trending that way. Then there's also early decision, which is the binding option. So it's for your number one top choice dream school. If I got in, I would go in a heartbeat, because you choose one school, you sign a form that says exactly that, and if you get in, you are going. So that does tend to be a similar timeline of an early November deadline and a notification just before Christmas time. So that's something to keep in mind going into fall of senior year, because you're going back to school at basically right after Labor Day. That really gives you a month and a half before those first deadlines. It's really challenging for students and also obviously for your counselors and for your teachers. So the more you can hopefully get started earlier and the more notification you can give to those other folks, the better. So requesting letters of recommendation, it's something to maybe even consider doing this year. Junior year teachers do make the best recommenders. They know you for the entire academic year, and they know you probably better than those senior year teachers will get to know you over the course of a month or two. So think about core teachers, again, English, math, foreign language, social science, or science courses. And counselor letter as well for some schools, that'll be required, so make sure you're checking in with your counselor about that as well. Setting up interviews. So this will be a smaller percentage of schools, I would say maybe 100 or so, or well, probably more. Smaller private liberal arts colleges primarily will have an interview process. It's typically optional, but if you feel comfortable and confident presenting yourself in person, or you have a unique involvement or resume item that's maybe hard to explain on paper, an actual interview might be a great opportunity to bring that a little bit more to life. So those are usually available September to November of senior year. They're often with alums who live here in Seattle. If you happen to visit campuses in the fall, you can do them on the college campus itself, or you can do them with admission counselors when they are traveling here to Seattle if it's a school outside of the area. So keep that in mind. Again, it's a smaller percentage of colleges, but it can be a really good opportunity. Colleges will do a lot of travel, not just for interviews, but for other events. So college fairs in the fall, a lot of colleges come here. I know they love Ingram students because of all of the strong offerings here. So take advantage of the opportunities to connect with colleges when they come here as well, just to show that you're interested and also hopefully to learn about the school as well. I would say fall is probably your last chance to take the SAT or ACT. And I would say particularly aim for September or October at the latest, or maybe November if you're looking at the later deadlines. I've seen more and more colleges also coming out and saying, oh, you took the November one, we won't consider that for our early deadline. So I'm seeing some, again, creep of that formerly like January deadline up to November.
Is there an advantage to taking SAT versus ACT, submitting either one of those?
No advantage. I mean, I will say the majority of the time, students are scoring similarly between the two. But 20-25% of the time, I'll work with a family or the student has a clear preferred test where they're in a higher percentile, or they just got done with it and said, this felt more comfortable, the pacing fit me better, whatever have you. So either one is fine. They're all acceptable by every college out there. There's no advantage to one or the other. So I think it's just whatever the student prefers. I'll say the one rare exception is Canadian universities, and out of the US universities, sometimes if you take the SAT, they also want to see some subject tests in addition to that versus just the ACT. I don't understand why that is, because I don't think that the ACT does a better job of capturing that information, but that's kind of a rare exception. Yeah. And then deadlines, as I said, I think regardless, I encourage students to try to be done with all of their applications around mid-November, because after Thanksgiving break, as you're going into December, as you're going and planning for winter break, productivity starts to decline. Essay quality, in my experience, tends to rapidly decline. So I would really try to focus your energy as much as possible and get that all done before Thanksgiving. And then lastly, parents are going to be doing the financial aid applications again. October 1st is when they open the CSS Profile, if you need that for your schools, and then the FAFSA, which is the one that every college requires. So be mindful of those deadlines, but I would still say you've got your tax returns now, so go ahead and do that once it opens in October instead of waiting until the deadline. So fall of senior year, basically in a nutshell, it's going to be crazy. Good luck. Any questions on that timeline, that time frame? Okay, awesome. So then it all calms down. So you get into winter and spring. If you've got senior friends, I guess some of them might be calm and some of them might be frantically trying to decide where they're going to go to college by May 1st, which is next week. But typically things really calm down. First and foremost, I think that's a great time to sit down and write thank you notes to your guidance counselor and your teacher recommenders and other people who've helped on your journey. Super, super important. I think it's also really important to make sure you're checking your email. I know a lot of kids these days, and this makes me feel old, but kids these days don't have emails and they don't check their emails. Unfortunately, that's still the main way that colleges are going to communicate with you. So if you want to make sure that you're not going to get denied on a technicality because you forgot to submit a thing that they sent a request via email for, make sure you're checking your email. You have an email that's like up and running, or give someone else access who will actually check it for you, or whatever you need to do. But that is the primary way colleges will communicate with you about any missing documents, so keep that in mind. If you're using the later deadlines, many colleges will ask for your mid-year reports from your high school counselor, so that's going to be your first semester senior year grades. Hopefully you're not failing everything. So you may need to request that to be sent as well. This is also a really great time to look at what are outside scholarship opportunities for you. I know Ingram has a really nice website with a ton of local scholarships as well as some national scholarships, so I'd strongly recommend looking through that list and clicking on the ones that seem relevant for your case. I know in particular the local credit unions and banks are very generous with scholarships in the $2,000 to $4,000 range, so that's not too shabby. You have to have an account with them, of course, but you can do that and then pretty easily apply for those. Local organizations, clubs, your employers may have scholarships available for your students, so be basically try to keep your eyes open for that. I'll be very honest though, the vast majority of scholarships are going to come from colleges themselves. So I think that's where having a well-rounded list that incorporates your family's financial situation is super important, because a lot of these outside scholarships are either incredibly competitive or have incredibly specific criteria that you may not be eligible for. So it's not a pointless effort. There's definitely some great options out there, but I would say focus a little bit more on the actual distribution of your college list as a better source of scholarships. And then last but not least, you'll find out all of the remaining college decisions by no later than April 1st. And then, as again you may know from your senior friends, you have until May 1st to decide where you will be off to in the fall. Questions about the timeline? Yes.
I just had a silly question. Do most colleges notify you with a letter, or I see like kids going online to check? Like, what's the majority of admissions decisions to the delivery vehicle these days?
I would say the majority are through their own college portals, which usually they'll have you set up after you apply. Thank you, here's your college portal ID information, log in. And that's where they'll post decisions, that's where they'll post if there's missing documents, etc. But they'll also usually send an email, and they'll also usually send it via postal mail. It just might be the portal's like the first thing for the like super anxious kid, or like everyone, obviously, because it's very anxiety inducing. There's a few schools that are randomly very old school and will like only do a formal letter in the mail, which I think is kind of cool. So, yeah. Okay. Anything else?
So when they tell you that you're in,
Mm-hmm.
is that when they also tell you what sort of financial scholarship you
Yes, it should be.
deserve?
Hopefully. Especially if it's a regular decision, notifications, or if it's happening in March or April, where you only have that full month to consider the offer, they usually will send that at the same time or within a few days. I have seen a delay for students who are applying early action and finding out in December. I have often seen their full financial aid packages coming a little bit later, which is fine for early action because, again, you still have until May 1st to decide. For early decision, it will come at the same time because, again, that's hugely important. Yeah. Okay. So thinking of some resources to use on this journey, I've listed only a few here. I could fill pages and pages with some of my favorite resources, but I'll start with the top two, which I think are at least probably my favorite, or the ones I use the most. So collegedata.com, I'll say the website itself is pretty boring, but it gives you the nitty-gritty statistics in a pretty easy way. So this pulls information from a big survey that goes out to every college every year. It's called the Common Data Set. There's a handful of colleges that randomly decide not to fill it in, like University of Chicago. But otherwise, basically all colleges fill this in, and they'll include information on their admission statistics, on average student qualities, on admission rate, early decision versus regular decision rate. They'll even include what are the factors that we look for in our application process, and how important is that in our review. So our essay is important here, or not important at all, or we don't have an essay. It'll talk about test scores. It'll have something about level of an applicant's interest and engagement with the college. It'll note whether or not they do interviews, whether they consider alumni or legacy status. So it'll break down all those factors on their admission page, and will kind of indicate maybe what they're focusing their energy on most in reviewing applications. It will also give some really good details on scholarship awards. So what's the average financial aid package for admitted students? What percentage of students are getting their need met? What, for students that maybe don't qualify, or just stronger students in general, who's getting merit scholarships? What's the average amount? What percentage of students? It breaks it all down. So if you're a data nerd, you're gonna love it. I think it's a lot of fun just to play around with that and kind of get more of those statistics for each of the schools. I think Big Future from College Board is a really good source for students to narrow down the list based on some key criteria. It does tend to be more focused on things like what is your profile information, your SAT score, for example, or what size of school are you looking for, or what majors do you want, or what location do you want to be in. So it does a nice job of filtering based on kind of those core elements, and then you can investigate the schools from there. The only thing it doesn't do a very good job of is capturing like what's the student life like on those college campuses, what's the academic culture. So you can't really assess that, but you can again do some basic filtering, which is I think a good starting point. I also like Coursava.com, which is a free site. It's actually in development with one of my college counseling colleagues here in Seattle. So this is where you can kind of look at different college parameters. This is for the student specifically, and you can indicate how important that is to you in your college experience. So it's looking more at things like, do you want to be surrounded by outdoorsy students? Do you want a bike-friendly campus? Do you want strong access to professors? Do you want pre-med advising? So you can look at about 110 different factors and kind of determine on a little emoji scale of like, is this something you must have in your college experience, or is this something that you do not want? And you can kind of generate a nice report from that to start that conversation with family, with friends, with high school counselors about narrowing down your list, or you can use it as a tool to assess colleges as you do your visits. You know, here's the top 10 criteria for me. Where does my college fall after visiting with all of these key elements? As I mentioned, again, calculating your expected family contribution or using the net price calculators on specific college websites. Super, super, super important.
Can I ask about that?
Yeah.
I'm unclear on that. Is that something that you do that applies to all schools, or is that something you do for each school you're interested in, or both?
Yes, both. I didn't clarify that very well, so thank you for telling me that. So expected family contribution, that's the one that you can do that's based on the general federal financial aid formula. So essentially tied in with similar questions to what the FAFSA would ask. So that's the federal methodology. Great for estimating that. If you're looking at schools that require an additional form called the CSS Profile, so that's typically private colleges and very selective schools, so maybe the schools on average that admit fewer than 50% of students, let's say. Those tend to be the schools that will require that. And in that case, I think the net price calculator on their specific college financial aid website is worth that additional step, because they will ask a lot more questions, such as if it's a divorced family, what's the non-custodial parent information? They'll include that. What's your home equity situation? What car do you drive? I've even seen that. So they will look at the full picture, and I will say those do tend to be the schools that are very generous with financial aid if you qualify for aid. So it may, for some families that may help them as compared to just looking at the predominantly income-focused EFC calculator. But yes, I think at least doing one of them, and again, if you're targeting private schools that require the profile, doing the net price calculator is
And
so
does
helpful.
the net price calculator tell you if you qualify for aid, or?
Yes, so it will say specifically for how this college calculates their financial aid, this is what we would expect you to pay per year at the specific college. If you get it, yeah.
If you get it, you can expect this pricing.
You can expect this.
And those are pretty accurate.
If they're really nosy, then yes. There's some that like try to skate by with a really basic one, and if you're like, oh, I'm done after 3 minutes, then it's probably not super accurate. But if they're asking a lot of questions and it's taking you quite a bit of time to fill in, and especially if they're asking information about your student's academic profile, their test scores, their GPA, they might also incorporate, here's the estimated scholarship that we would give to your student. So it can be really helpful and very school specific. I'd say
that's separate from the application process though, right?
yes.
Okay,
This
so
is
you just
all
go
like,
on there, just me, the person paying,
Yeah.
and say, okay, do.
this is all
You
like
can say,
front end
okay,
research, making sure that like,
it's reasonable.
yeah, exactly. Making sure that you don't fill it in and they're like, you can afford $50,000 a year, and you're like, No. So basically it's for that purpose. And then if you're planning to do early decision, you could do the net price calculator, or I would just say go directly to financial aid and have them do an estimated award for you, because they will do that. Good question. Yeah, it's a little bit complicated, unnecessarily complicated, but you can get a lot of information from that. And I think going back to your original question, what would you expect that to be in terms of like how accurate? I'd say on average, it's coming out to be within $1,000 to $2,000 of what their financial aid ends up being. So,
And do bigger schools and public schools have net price calculators?
they'll have the net price calculators, but the vast majority of them are only looking at the FAFSA and only looking at the federal information and the more income focused stuff. So the net price calculator may not reveal a lot of additional information there, but it may incorporate scholarships. So it still could be worth doing for that consideration, but yeah, definitely for the privates for sure. Yeah. Okay. So other resources, good old-fashioned books. I love the FISC guide. I know the counseling office has copies of the FISC guide. Great profiles of schools, 10 to 12 paragraphs based on surveys of alumni, faculty, current students, staff members, sometimes even like town residents. Like you get a really nice overview of the college culture, academically, socially, the sports teams, so everything basically. So I would check that out. There's not a profile for every single college out there, but there's several hundred, so chances are one of your schools may be in there. The colleges that change lives are also, it's a really awesome group of schools. It's about 40 smaller private liberal arts colleges that are really exceptional opportunities for especially B and C students. So it's kind of like hey, you don't have to be a 4.0, 1,500 crazy person to get into college these days. These are some really amazing options that some are selective, but a lot of them are admitting at least 50% or 70% of students and are really transformational places and really amazing faculty connections and support. So I love that book and opening students' eyes to those types of options. The Princeton Review has some good resources as well. I like the other two better, so I won't focus on that one too much. And then virtual tours. So YouTube pages, or YouTube channels for colleges, both admissions specific or just general, or for the program you're targeting, or for an extracurricular activity you might be interested in. That can be a good starting point. Campus Reel is another one of my recent favorites, where it's student produced videos, totally unattached to the admissions office, and it's students just basically like walking you through their day, or here's my dorm, or here's an interview with my best friend who's from here and is doing pre-med. So you can get some nice little snapshots of campus through that. Social media as well, Instagram accounts I think are great for students to follow for the schools you like, where it's like you can very lazily research college over the course of like 5 months, where you're like, oh, I'm following a few schools I like, I'm following a few related like student organizations or majors, and like I'm casually learning about college and the culture here, and maybe discovering it's a fit, or maybe like, oh, every post is really annoying to me and it doesn't appeal to me, and maybe that's not a school I want on my list because it doesn't seem like I would do well there. So that's another easy way to start researching. And then finally, talking to your high school counselor, very important to establish that relationship. And be sure to take advantage of the resources. I know, again, there's a lot of stuff going on, especially in the fall, so making sure that you stay in touch and you're paying attention to those opportunities. Questions about resources?
Your offices are in Madison area? Madison Park?
What was that?
Your office?
Oh, my office specifically? Yeah, I'm in Madison Valley, I guess. City People's Garden stores across the street.
But do you consult over Skype, I see?
I do, yes. Yeah, so I guess I'll transition to the using a private college counselor section real quick. So yeah, I do work with students all over the place. I think a lot of counselors do. So if you're thinking of hiring a college counselor, you're not just limited to who's here in Seattle, and especially if your student has really specific needs or preferences or interests, like again, performing arts, folks or, seeking admission to architecture programs or accelerated programs, there's probably someone who specializes in that somewhere in the country. So I would definitely be sure, first and foremost, to make sure that person is part of HECA or IECA. I have those two directories listed here, where you can ensure that they're committed to ethics and professional standards. There's different qualifications for being a part of that, including application process and going to conferences and certain number of college visits per year, et cetera, et cetera. So definitely check that. There's also some great training programs available. I know UC Irvine and I believe UC Los Angeles, UCLA have certificate programs for college counselors. So look for that as well. Or a certified educational planner designation. That's a pretty small percentage of folks doing this, but it's a really high level of standard for training and, again, professional standards and ethics. I would also suggest looking for counselors that are involved in bigger admission counseling groups. So there's a national organization called NACAC. There's a regional organization called PNACAC. The acronyms are weird and kind of don't really say anything. It's like admission counseling. So just NACAC and PNACAC is all you need to know. But look for that as well. And then also look for folks that hopefully have some sort of experience either on college admission side, on the high school counseling side. I know a lot of folks who have a writing background do this as well and focus on essay work, and I think that's great and valuable as well. So, so pay attention to that. Obviously, in light of the recent scandal, if someone is guaranteeing your child admission to a school, they're asking you for $20,000 up front or something crazy like that. If they're saying they'll write your child's essays for them or package them in a way to make it seem like they developed a cure for cancer, probably not going to be someone committed to ethical practices and probably not someone you want to work with. So just be aware of that. I would also just share a few things in terms of the options. Some folks just do hourly work, some are working on essays exclusively, some are doing long-term structured programs. So there's a lot of different options out there. It's definitely not a cheap investment. I'll be really honest about that, and that's something I still struggle with, and this is my 5th year of doing it. I'm just so uncomfortable about it, but it's just the way that the industry is and the investments that ethical counselors are putting into their professional development and traveling and visiting schools. So I'd say on average in this area, the hourly rate is about $150 plus. However, the vast majority of us are doing pro bono work or working with families on a sliding scale basis, so don't think that it's totally off the table for your family if that's an absurd figure and that's not going to be feasible. Don't be shy to ask, because I think basically all of the counselors that I know and collaborate with in this area, we all do a lot of pro bono work or sliding scale work, so don't rule that out.
Right. Could you help me to understand? I gather that the bulk of your work is directly with the students.
Yes.
Maybe initially with a parent or both parents.
So though
going. But
mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's, I think, pretty typical, or hopefully typical, typically I'll meet with families all together once or twice, especially to establish parameters around the financial piece and expectations in general. But from there, my work is all one-on-one with the student. And again, I think ethically, the student needs to be really invested in this process. The student is the one writing the essays, you're the one assessing the fit of the school, you're the one going to college. So I do put a lot of the onus on the student to do that. I hopefully empower them and give them the information needed to tackle that with confidence. But I think they're the ones going to college. And I'll say the same for parents. I know a lot of parents are very invested in the process and researching and putting everything together for their kid, but I definitely say as much as you can, let them be free, let them tackle it as much as possible, nudging along the way and making sure they're not waiting till last minute, definitely great. But they do need to take ownership of the process. That's my opinion, at least. But, yeah.
That's great.
And then essays, I didn't really talk about. As I mentioned, I knew I was going to run out of time. But I have a few little tips on here about the essay. I didn't include this under college planning resources, but write down college essay guy. He's like the best. I've met him at a few different conferences, and actually he has a training program for college counselors, and it's amazing. So he has some really great tips and tools and resources, brainstorming activities, sample essays, like the whole gamut, videos, everything. So I would really strongly recommend checking into those resources as you're approaching the college essay. And then I think, again, as I mentioned earlier, don't pay attention to the prompts because they're not particularly great, but pay more attention to what key attributes, personality traits, values do you want to come through about you, the student, of course, at the end of someone reading that essay, and working backwards from there to figure out what stories would best highlight those key elements of who you are. So that's what I'd say about the essay, and tackle it in the summer, ideally. Okay. Questions, concerns? Are you feeling more stressed or less stressed? You've got a full year. I mean, sort of. You've got like 8 months, and then you've got a little chill time, and then you've got decision time, but you can do it. What was that?
Do you have a card?
No. But
Is there a website?
I do have, yeah, my website's on here. I'm the worst business person ever. So. But yeah, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest
Thank
of your
you.
evening. Yeah, thanks.